Pretend you're my husband. Daniel Hayes looked up from the cold plastic chair in the hospital corridor. He was waiting alone for test results that could change his life forever. The woman who just spoke was dressed in a sharp, expensive suit, her eyes darting around the hallway as if she were being hunted. Two men were approaching from the far end of the ward. Before Daniel could speak, she grabbed his hand, her fingers trembling. Please, just for a minute. Daniel didn't understand what was happening, but seconds later, the entire hospital corridor went silent. Daniel Hayes was 36 years old, but if you looked at the lines around his eyes, you would think he had lived twice that long. Life had not been kind to Daniel, yet he never complained. He was a man of few words and a massive heart. For the past 9 years, Daniel's entire world had revolved around a single person, his daughter Sophie. Daniel was a long-haul truck driver. His life was measured in miles, highway exits, and the humming sound of a diesel engine. It was a grueling gait that kept him on the road for days at a time, staring at the gray asphalt of the interstate. But every mile he drove was for Sophie. He worked those winding, lonely hours so she could have a warm bed, a good school, and the childhood he never had. Sophie was his miracle. Ever since her mother walked out when she was just a baby, Daniel had been both father and mother. He learned how to braid hair by watching YouTube videos. He learned how to bake cookies, even if they usually ended up a bit burnt. Every time he pulled his heavy rig back into their small driveway, Sophie would run out, her face lighting up like a Christmas tree. "My dad's home!" she would scream. That sound was the only fuel Daniel ever needed. However, lately the road was getting harder to handle. It started as a dull ache in his chest during a long climb through the mountains. Then came the dizzy spells, sudden moments where the world would spin and he'd have to pull his 18-wheeler to the shoulder of the road, gasping for air. Daniel tried to ignore it. He told himself it was just the coffee, the lack of sleep, or the stress of the bills piling up on the kitchen table. But during his last trip, the pain became undeniable. It felt like an iron band tightening around his ribs, stealing his breath. He managed to finish his row, but as soon as he got home and kissed Sophie's forehead, he knew he couldn't wait any longer. If something happened to him, what would happen to her? The thought of Sophie being left alone in the world was more terrifying than any illness. So he went to the hospital. He underwent a series of tests, scans, blood work, and stress tests that left him exhausted. And that is where we find him now, sitting in a quiet, sterile hallway under the hum of fluorescent lights, waiting for the doctor to call his name. He was alone. In a building filled with people, Daniel Hayes had never felt more isolated. His hands, calloused from years of gripping the steering wheel, were folded tightly in his lap to hide their shaking. While Daniel waited in the shadows of the public ward, another world was moving just a few floors above him. Olivia Carter was 32, the CEO of Carter Industries, and one of the most powerful women in the city. To the public, she was a woman of steel, brilliant, cold, and untouchable. She ran a multi-billion-dollar empire with a level of discipline that intimidated even her fiercest competitors. But today, Olivia Carter wasn't a CEO. She was a granddaughter. She had rushed to the hospital to see the only person who truly knew the real Olivia, her grandmother, Evelyn. Evelyn was the woman who had raised her after her parents died in a tragic accident. She was the one who taught Olivia that power means nothing if you have no one to share it with. Now, Evelyn was in a high-dependency unit, her heart failing, her time running thin. Olivia stood by her grandmother's bed, holding a hand that felt as fragile as parchment paper. Evelyn's eyes fluttered open, and she whispered the same thing she had been saying for months. "Olivia, my sweet girl, I just want to know you won't be alone. I want to see you happy. I want to know there is someone to take care of you when I'm gone." Olivia felt a lump in her throat. She had spent her life building walls, focusing on the company, and avoiding the vulnerability of love. She didn't have a husband. She didn't even have a boyfriend, but she couldn't tell her dying grandmother that. She couldn't let her leave this world worrying about her granddaughter's loneliness. Distraught and needing air, Olivia stepped out of the room. She needed a moment to breathe, to compose herself. But as she moved toward the elevators, she noticed two men in the distance, journalists from a tabloid that had been hounding her for weeks, trying to find a crack in her Ice Queen persona. They were looking for a story, and a tearful CEO at a hospital was exactly what they wanted. She turned a corner, her heels clicking rapidly on the linoleum, her heart racing. She saw a quiet hallway, a row of plastic chairs, and a man sitting alone. He looked grounded, solid, and completely out of place in her world of high-stakes finance. Without thinking, she moved toward him. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The hospital corridor was filled with the smell of antiseptic and the distant, muffled sound of a page being announced over the intercom. Daniel was staring at a crack in the floor tile, trying to pray, when a shadow fell over him. He looked up, expecting a nurse. Instead, he saw a woman who looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine. She was wearing a tailored navy suit, but her hair was slightly disheveled, and her eyes were wide with a mixture of grief and panic. Before Daniel could ask if she was okay, she sat down abruptly in the chair next to him. She smelled like expensive perfume and hospital soap. She leaned in close, her voice a frantic whisper that barely reached his ears. "Pretend you are my husband," she said. Daniel froze. He looked at her, his mouth opening slightly in confusion. "Excuse me?" "Please," she urged, her hand reaching out and grasping his. Her palm was cold, and he could feel her pulse racing through her fingertips. "Just for a minute. There are people. I just need them to leave me alone. Please, help me." Daniel looked past her and saw two men with cameras tucked under their coats approaching the corner. They were scanning the hallway, their eyes landing on Olivia. Daniel didn't know who she was, but he knew what it felt like to be hunted. He knew what it felt like to want to disappear. As the men drew closer, Daniel didn't pull his hand away. Instead, he shifted his weight, moving closer to her. He put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her into a protective embrace. To anyone watching, they looked like a couple sharing a moment of quiet grief. The two men stepped into the hallway. They slowed down as they passed, their eyes lingering on the back of Olivia's head and the man holding her. Daniel looked up at them, his face a mask of weary calm. He didn't look like a truck driver. He looked like a husband, protecting his wife's privacy in a moment of pain. "Is everything okay here?" one of the men asked, his voice probing. Daniel looked him dead in the eye. His voice was deep, steady, and carried the weight of a man who had seen enough of the world to know how to handle it. "My wife and I are waiting for the doctor," Daniel said. "We'd appreciate some privacy." The man hesitated, looking at Daniel's calloused hands and then at Olivia's expensive suit. The contrast was strange, but the intensity in Daniel's gaze was enough to make them back off. They muttered a quick apology and turned around, heading back toward the main lobby. The silence that followed was heavy. Olivia didn't move for a long time. She stayed tucked under Daniel's arm, her forehead resting against his shoulder. He could feel her start to relax, her breathing slowing down. Slowly she pulled away. She smoothed her hair and wiped a stray tear from her cheek, the CEO mask sliding back into place. But her eyes were different now. They were soft. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm Olivia. I'm sorry for dragging you into that. I just couldn't deal with them right now." Daniel leaned back against the hard plastic chair. The adrenaline was fading and the dull ache in his chest was returning. "I'm Daniel, and don't worry about it. We all have days where we just want the world to stop pushing." Olivia looked at him properly for the first time. She saw the fatigue in his face, the way he held his left arm close to his body. She saw the hospital wristband he was wearing. "Are you okay, Daniel?" He gave a short, dry laugh. "I'm waiting for results. It's been a long day." They sat together in the quiet hallway. For a few minutes, the billionaire and the truck driver were just two people in a hospital, bonded by a strange lie and a moment of shared humanity. Olivia found herself strangely comfortable in his presence. There was no pretense with him. He didn't want anything from her. He didn't even know who she was. Just then, a door opened. A nurse in blue scrubs stepped out, holding a clipboard. "Daniel Hayes, the doctor will see you now." Daniel stood up, his legs feeling heavy. He looked at Olivia one last time. "Good luck with whatever you're hiding from, Olivia." "Good luck with your results, Daniel," she replied. As Daniel disappeared behind the heavy wooden door, Olivia didn't leave. She sat back down in the plastic chair. She told herself she was just waiting for her grandmother's vitals to stabilize. But in reality, she was waiting for a man she had just met to walk back out through that door. If you were Daniel, would you help a stranger like that? Comment, help, or walk away. The doctor's office was small, filled with the smell of old paper and the hum of a computer monitor. Daniel sat on the edge of the examination table, his heart thumping against his ribs. He had spent his life navigating dangerous roads in stormy weather, but he had never been this afraid. The doctor, a gray-haired man with a kind but tired face, looked at the charts for a long time before speaking. "Daniel," he said softly, "I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Your tests show a significant blockage in two of your main arteries. It's what we call a widowmaker scenario." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. He felt the air leave his lungs. "What does that mean, Doc?" "It means you're lucky you walked in here today. You need surgery, and you need it soon. If you go back out on the road, if you put your body under that kind of stress again, you might not come home." Daniel closed his eyes. He didn't think about himself. He didn't think about the pain. He thought about Sophie. He thought about her waiting by the window for his truck to pull in. He thought about her 10th birthday, her high school graduation, her wedding. If he died, who would take care of her? His bank account was nearly empty. His insurance was basic. The cost of a major heart surgery was astronomical. "How much?" Daniel asked, his voice cracking. The doctor gave him a figure that made Daniel's head spin. It was more money than he would earn in 5 years. Daniel thanked the doctor and walked back out into the hallway. His movements were slow, like a man walking through deep water. He reached the plastic chairs and sat down, dropping his head into his hands. The weight of the world was finally too much to carry. "Daniel?" He looked up. Olivia was still there. She was standing a few feet away, her brow furrowed in concern. She saw the look on his face and she knew. "It's bad news, isn't it?" she asked softly. Daniel didn't know why, but he told her. He told this stranger in the expensive suit everything. He told her about the blockage, the surgery he couldn't afford, and the daughter who had no one else. He spoke with a raw honesty that he usually kept buried deep inside. "I've worked my whole life," Daniel said, a single tear escaping and rolling down his cheek. "I've never asked for a handout. I just wanted to see her grow up, that's all." Olivia listened in silence. She felt a sharp pang in her chest. She had spent her life surrounded by people who complained about the quality of the caviar or the price of their private jets. Here was a man who was facing death, and his only concern was his daughter's future. She thought about her grandmother, Evelyn, lying in the room upstairs. She thought about the lie she had almost told, the lie that she was happy and settled. Suddenly, a crazy idea began to form in Olivia's mind. It was a business deal, perhaps the most important one she would ever strike. But it wasn't about profit. It was about mercy. "Daniel," she said, her voice turning crisp and professional, the CEO taking charge. "My grandmother is upstairs. She's dying. Her last wish, the only thing she cares about, is knowing that I'm not alone. She wants to see me married. She wants to know there's someone to look after me." Daniel looked at her, confused. "I don't understand." "I need a husband," Olivia said. "Or at least, I need my grandmother to believe I have one. Just for a few weeks. Just until she finds peace." Daniel shook his head. "Olivia, I'm a truck driver. I'm a dying truck driver. I'm not a husband for a woman like you." "You're exactly the man I need," she countered. "You're honest. You're kind. You protected me in this hallway without even knowing my name. You're a father who would do anything for his child." She stepped closer, her eyes locked onto his. "Here is the deal, Daniel. You play the part. You come upstairs with me. You be the man my grandmother wants to see me with. In return, I will find the best cardiothoracic surgeon in the country. I will pay for your surgery. I will pay for your recovery. And I will set up a trust fund for Sophie so she never has to worry about her future, no matter what happens." Daniel stared at her. It sounded like a fairy tale. It sounded impossible. "You'd do that? For a stranger?" "You're the man who saved me from the vultures today," Olivia said. "And I think maybe we can save each other." Daniel thought about Sophie. He thought about her smile. He thought about the surgery that could give him 20 more years with her. He looked at Olivia. She wasn't just a CEO. She was a granddaughter trying to give an old woman a peaceful end. "What do I have to do?" he asked. Olivia reached out and took his hand. Just be the man you were 10 minutes ago. Be the man who held me when I was scared. Daniel took a deep breath. He stood up, ignored the pain in his chest, and nodded. Okay, let's go to meet your grandmother. What would you do if you were Daniel right now? Tell us in the comments. The high-dependency unit was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen. Olivia led Daniel through the heavy doors. She had already briefed him on the basics, how they met at a charity event, how he had won her over with his quiet strength, how they had kept it a secret to avoid the press. As they approached Evelyn's bed, Olivia's grip on Daniel's hand tightened. He squeezed back, offering her the same silent support he had in the hallway. Evelyn looked tiny in the large hospital bed. Her skin was translucent, but when she saw Olivia, her eyes brightened. And when she saw the man standing behind her, a slow, weak smile spread across her face. "Grandmother," Olivia said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is Daniel, the man I told you about. My husband." Daniel stepped forward. He didn't have to act. He saw the kindness in Evelyn's eyes, and he felt a genuine surge of affection for the woman who had raised Olivia. He knelt by the bed and took her hand. "It's an honor to meet you, Evelyn." "And then, Ellen," Daniel said, "Olivia has told me so much about you. You're the reason she's the incredible woman she is today." Evelyn looked at Daniel's hands, the calluses, the strength. She looked at the way he looked at Olivia. She saw the truth that Olivia didn't even know was there yet. "You have a good soul, Daniel," Evelyn whispered. "I can see it. Thank you for taking care of my girl." For the next hour, they sat by the bed. Daniel told stories of the road, of the sunrises over the desert, the snow in the mountains, and the quiet beauty of the country. He spoke about Sophie, and Evelyn's eyes sparkled at the mention of a child. Olivia watched him amazed. He was perfect. He was warm, humble, and sincere. When Evelyn finally drifted off into a peaceful sleep, they stepped back out into the hallway. Olivia leaned against the wall, exhaling a breath she felt she had been holding for years. "You were amazing," she said, looking at Daniel with a new kind of intensity. She believed every word. "I wasn't lying about you being incredible, Olivia," Daniel said quietly. The next morning, Olivia kept her end of the bargain. A black sedan picked Daniel and Sophie up from their apartment. Sophie was wide-eyed, staring at the leather seats and the television in the back. "Are we going on a secret mission, Dad?" she asked. "Something like that, Soph," Daniel said, ruffling her hair. They were taken to a private clinic on the outskirts of the city. It didn't look like a hospital. It looked like a five-star hotel. Olivia was waiting in the lobby. She had hired a top-tier nanny to watch Sophie while Daniel underwent his final preparations. The surgeon, a world-renowned specialist, met with Daniel. "Ms. Carter has given us unlimited resources," the doctor said. "We're going to use a minimally invasive procedure. We'll have you back on your feet in no time." Before they wheeled him into surgery, Olivia came to his room. She looked nervous. "The trust fund for Sophie is already signed," she said, handing him a folder. "Regardless of what happens in that room, she's taken care of. But Daniel, please, come back. My grandmother wants to see you again." Daniel looked at her. He realized that this was no longer just a business deal for her. "I'm a truck driver, Olivia. We're tough to break. I'll see you in a few hours." The surgery lasted 6 hours. Olivia stayed in the waiting room the entire time. She canceled her board meetings. She ignored her buzzing phone. She sat in the same way Daniel had sat the day before, waiting, hoping, and praying. When the surgeon finally emerged and gave the thumbs up, Olivia felt a wave of relief so powerful it made her dizzy. He was safe. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel recovered in the private clinic. Olivia visited every day. Sometimes she brought work, sitting in the chair by his bed while he slept. Sometimes she brought Sophie, and the three of them would eat dinner together in the garden. Sophie adored Olivia. She called her the princess of the big tower. Olivia, who had never spent time with children, found herself enchanted by Sophie's energy and honesty. As Daniel grew stronger, the lie became harder to maintain. Not because it was difficult to act like they were together, but because it was becoming harder to remember that it was an act. Evelyn's condition was stabilizing, a miracle the doctors attributed to her newfound peace of mind. She was being moved to a hospice wing where she could spend her final days in comfort. One evening, as Daniel was preparing to be discharged, Olivia sat on the edge of his bed. "The doctors say you're fully healed," she said. "You can go back to your life, Daniel. I've arranged for a new job for you at Carter Industries. Logistics management. No more long hauls. You'll be home every night for Sophie." Daniel looked at her. "The deal is done then?" "Yes," Olivia said, her voice dropping. "My grandmother is at peace. You're healthy. Sophie is safe. You don't owe me anything else." But Daniel didn't feel like the deal was done. He felt like it was just beginning. There was a secret he had been keeping, a memory that had been clawing at the back of his mind since the moment he saw Olivia's face in the hospital hallway. Would you accept Olivia's offer if you were Daniel? Comment yes or no. A few days after Daniel returned home, he invited Olivia over for dinner. It was a simple meal, spaghetti and meatballs, Sophie's favorite. Their small apartment felt even smaller with Olivia there, her presence filling the room with a grace that didn't quite fit the worn linoleum and mismatched chairs. After Sophie had gone to bed, Daniel and Olivia sat on the small balcony, looking out at the city lights. "Olivia," Daniel began, his voice low, "you asked me in the hospital why I helped you. You asked why a stranger would do that." Olivia nodded. "And you said we all have days where the world pushes too hard." "That was part of it," Daniel said. "But there's something else. Something I didn't realize until I saw your grandmother's room. She has a photo on her nightstand, a photo of you when you were 20, standing by an old red convertible." Olivia's breath hitched. "That car was my pride and joy. I lost it in the accident, the night my life almost ended." Daniel turned to look at her, his eyes filled with a deep, haunting memory. It was 12 years ago, a rainy Tuesday night on Highway 99. The roads were slick, and the fog was so thick you couldn't see 10 feet in front of you. Olivia froze. "How do you know that?" "I was driving my first solo rig," Daniel said. "I was young, eager to make time. I saw the headlights of a red car swerve to avoid a fallen branch. I saw it hit the embankment and roll. It came to rest upside down, the engine already starting to smoke." Olivia's hands began to shake. She remembered the smell of gasoline. She remembered the sound of the rain hitting the metal. She remembered the feeling of being trapped, the fire licking at the edges of her vision. "I pulled my truck over," Daniel continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I grabbed my crowbar and ran. The door was jammed. I could see a girl inside, unconscious, her hair matted with blood. I managed to pry the door open. I pulled her out and carried her across the road, just seconds before the fuel tank blew." Olivia was staring at him, her eyes wide with shock. "The paramedics. They said a good Samaritan saved me. They said he disappeared before the police arrived. I spent years trying to find him. I wanted to say thank you. I wanted to give him everything I had." "I didn't want anything," Daniel said. "I was just a kid with a truck. I saw someone in trouble and I did what anyone would do. I saw the sirens in the distance and I knew you were in good hands. I had a delivery to make and I didn't want the questions. I just moved on." Olivia was crying now, tears of pure realization. "All this time, I thought the hospital hallway was the first time we met, but you've been saving me since before I even knew your name." Daniel reached out and took her hand. "I didn't recognize you at first. You've changed a lot, Olivia. You've become so strong, but when I saw that photo, I knew. I knew why the universe put me in that hospital hallway on that specific day." Olivia leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. The deal was gone. The fake husband was gone. There was only the truth, a bond forged in fire 12 years ago and sealed in a hospital hallway. "My grandmother died this morning, Daniel," Olivia whispered. Daniel pulled back, his face filled with sorrow. "Olivia, I'm so sorry." "Don't be," she said, a small, sad smile on her lips. "She died with a smile on her face. She died believing I was loved. She died believing I was safe. And the best part is, she was right." She looked into his eyes, her gaze clear and certain. "Our agreement is over, Daniel. You have the pouring. Sophie has the trust fund. You are free to go." Daniel didn't move. He reached up and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "What if I don't want to go? What if I want to stay and be the man your grandmother thought I was?" Olivia's heart leaped. Daniel, I'm a CEO. I'm difficult. I'm work-obsessed. I'm not an easy person to be with. And I'm just a guy who knows his way around a heart and a highway, Daniel said. I think we'll be just fine. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that wasn't for a grandmother or for the press or for a deal. It was a kiss for the future. Sophie watched from the doorway, a sleepy smile on her face. She didn't know about the accident or the money or the heart surgery. She just knew that her dad wasn't alone anymore, and neither was the princess of the big tower. Life is a strange journey. Sometimes it takes a broken heart to find the person who can mend it. Sometimes the person who saves you is the one you were meant to save all along. Daniel Hayes returned to the road, but not as a lonely driver. He ran the logistics for a global empire, and every night he came home to a woman who loved him and a daughter who adored them both. Kindness is a circle. What you give it to the world always finds its way back to you, often when you least expect it, in the place you need it most. If you believe kindness can change lives and that everything happens for a reason, subscribe to Hidden Heart Stories for more powerful stories about everyday heroes.